the recording, so we've got this as a resource. I'll send this link to the recording afterwards to you as well. So if you want to either cover any of the topics again, or if you would like to share it with anybody in your network or anybody in your teams, then you've got the recording to be able to do that as well. So thanks again for joining us. Let's share my screen so that you can see what I can see. I have got a few slides this afternoon because I find it's just useful for content and make sure that I cover everything that I've been meaning to. I've also got a poll that I will run this afternoon, and I'll ask you, if you don't mind, just to kind of share some of your own experiences and insights. You can either come off mute and share them at the time, or you can put them in the chat. I think most of you will know Zoom. There's a chat box in Zoom in the settings. Just to let you know where that is, let me kickstart the chat. Here's the chat. There we go. So do feel free to drop comments in the chat. Can you see my screen, everybody? Is that sharing okay? Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Excellent. And you found the chat as well. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Liz. That's excellent. Perfect. Okay. Just going to mute some of the background. That's good. So this afternoon, this lunchtime, it's all about giving you some thinking space. So we're all lead very busy lives. You're busy in your business. You're busy at home as well. But this is an opportunity. We've got kind of about 50 minutes or so. We'll aim to finish at about 10 to 5 to the hour. It's just an opportunity for you to kind of get some thinking space. And hopefully today's topic has interested you. We're really looking at how do we stop micromanaging and start coaching for high performance in our businesses. And we'll look at some of the challenges with micromanagement, what causes it, why it happens, and your experiences of it. And then we'll look at some of the ways in which we can start to change the dynamic of that in our own businesses that improves our ability to lead our teams more effectively. So many of you will have experience of this, and I've got some interesting insights that I'll share today. And in particular, how to change your approach. That's the big thing. So there are lots of challenges with micromanaging. I don't know if you've experienced it, and whether you've, having experienced it, then repeated it. I know I'd have to say guilty to both of those things in my leadership career, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But for those of you who don't know, just a quick kind of introduction to me. So I'm Justin Lee. I run this business called Focus for Growth. We specialize in leadership development and sales coaching. So they're the two areas that we really focus in on. And my background is having been in sales and leadership positions for coming up to kind of 31 years now. And I have lots of experience in different corporations. And then about 5 years ago, left the corporate world and started my own business. And what I noticed over the years, and some of you might have heard me talk about this before, but it's really easy in our teams, in our businesses, for standards to start to slip and people's performance to start to drift off track. It can even happen to us as leaders in our businesses, right? And sometimes it's just about having the awareness and going back to some of the fundamentals so that we kind of regroup, get ourselves and our teams back on track and start to get, higher engagement, better consistency, better performance, and then the results come. I know that sounds obvious, but very often we can look at figures and results and not think about the things that improve performance so that the results then are generated. And that's kind of what we try and do in some of these sessions. Hopefully you'll see that in today's session, but it's also what we do with the work that we do with clients. And along the way, I've written a couple of books. So it's a book on sales, which is if you're leading a sales team or if you have a sales organization, it's really useful book on sales and the optimal approach to consultative selling. I also work with a lot of dental and medical clients, and we've got a book for clinicians that helps them to have better consultative conversations with their customers. And I've written this book about leadership, and this is the book we'll really look at today. So coaching leaders, how do we make a change towards a more coaching-based leadership style? And that's really where we'll try and get some kind of insights and hopefully value for you as we go through today. So I'll start with a quick poll. I like this poll just because it kind of gives me a sense for our people on the call and your experience. So first poll is about leadership development. So I'll quickly launch that and let you just answer it. It's nice and simple. Have you had structured leadership development in your career so far? So just a yes or a no. But if sometimes there's an other, some people might think, well, it's not as clean cut as yes or no. If it's an other, then just put click other, and then put it in the comments. I'd be interested to hear your experience. Okay, good. Oh, that's excellent. Right, so we've got a good group today. We've got 5 out of 6 of you have had leadership development, and then 1 out of 6 of you haven't. So 83% have, 17% haven't. So actually, that's really strong. So today's going to be a recap on some key principles for many of you. And if you look at the market evidence, it's really interesting. 61% of managers receive no training after promotion. So the majority of people don't get leadership development. And then 65% of that cohort receive no ongoing management training. So it's a real gap for a lot of businesses that just don't make the investment. And I'll kind of share some things with you that hopefully are useful. And if you've been on calls before, you might have seen this, but I always like to kind of almost go back to the kind of fundamentals and foundations of high performance, because that's, as we're leading teams and leading businesses, if we have a better understanding of that, really does help us to support and encourage our teams. But the first fundamental of high performance is psychology and mindset, and having a team and having people around us that actually believe they can succeed, have a good sense of self-confidence, and then from that point they're then able to execute. But without that fundamental layer, if you haven't got that in place, you can find people are actually tripping themselves up before they start. Once the psychology is in place, and sometimes this might kind of come and go depending on people's life experiences and other things that are going on for them and what's happening in the business. But once the psychology is in place, then we start to develop the right skill set so that people can start to perform and deliver in their roles. And psychology and skills are important. They get people kind of up and running. And then what we need to think about is, how do we systemize? How do we help people to do the right things in the right order more consistently, so that they are then delivering and scaling their performance? And these are things that you may or may not have put in place in your businesses, but hopefully just prompt some thinking around where you are, where your team are now, and what support you might need to give them in order to get them performing at the highest possible levels. And these 3 layers really are kind of interdependent. There's no one stands alone. You have to get all 3 in place for high performance. So I'd love to hear your current experiences of kind of team leadership challenges. What are the things that, as you're leading your businesses today, what are the things that you are noticing are challenging either you or your teams? So if you can just put those in the chat for me. There's lots of stuff comes up, and I've got some things that I'll share from previous sessions that we've run, but I'd love to hear for you today, or right now, what's your predominant leadership challenge? What's the one thing that you are working with? Nigel Gardner, thank you, Nigel. Focusing on key priorities, getting people to focus on key priorities. Yeah, okay, thanks, Nigel. Is that instead of getting distracted, Nigel, right? So they might be getting distracted with other stuff. Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Sandeep, thank you. Getting people to understand the end goal and motivate them to do and perform in their role. Okay, thanks, Sandeep. Yeah, so getting people to understand the end goal, what is it we're all trying to work towards, and then motivating them in their role. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sandeep. That's great. Liz, thank you, Liz. Key priorities, same as Nigel. Processes, owning their territories like it's their own business. That's brilliant. Yeah, or not, depending on whether or not they're doing that right. But getting them to take ownership for their territories as if they're running the business that's their own. I like that. I like that principle, and that's interesting, Liz, because you know, one of the things that you will notice, that many of us will notice, is that if you've been a high performer in your role, then that's how you think. You think, this is my business, I'm going to treat it like it's my business. And then it seems a bit alien when people don't take that approach, and it can kind of throw you and throw other members of the team. Yeah, thanks, Liz. And Salesforce and CRM. So using Salesforce and using the CRM so that it actually supports and helps them in growing in their roles. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Liz. Useful, really useful. So we've got some context. So as we go through today's session, whatever your challenge or your own priority is, think about the context of today's session, how it might help you to improve the situation with your teams. Thank you for sharing those. That's really useful. I love this quote by Steve Jobs. So it really relates to micromanagement. It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them exactly what to do, because we hire smart people, so they should be able to tell us what to do. They're supposed to inform us and add and contribute towards the business and its priorities. But let's look at this topic of micromanagement versus coaching. So why do people micromanage? Over the years, a lot of the experience I've had is that personally, and people I've worked with, if someone's a high performer, they tend to be the person that gets promoted. So they're very good at what they do and they know how to do the job that their team are doing. And with that comes a temptation to jump in and kind of really get closer to people and manage them in a way that is, considered for some people micromanagement. There's also this sense of if you're all in leadership positions, you don't have as much control in a leadership position as you have when you are performing in a role. So actually, to get a sense of control, one of the ways that people can find themselves kind of getting that sense of control is to micromanage, get closer to people, be more prescriptive, be more into the detail. And that, whilst it feels like it gives you a sense of control, it can feel a bit overwhelming for people that we're managing. The other reason is that people have high standards. We as leaders, we have high standards and we want people to meet those standards. And that can be a challenge because sometimes our standards are not achievable for some members of our teams. And if we don't realize that, it can cause us to get close and almost overly so for our teams. And then there's a trust issue, right? So sometimes we might not trust members of our teams to do what we need them to do properly. So we just get really close to them. We just start to kind of become, I guess, over-invested in the work they're doing. And of course, there's a piece around delegation. So if you've never been taught or trained how to delegate effectively, and delegation is a process, it's not just a one-time thing, and that's part of the challenge, I think. If we don't know how to delegate effectively, then micromanagement can be something that happens as a result. And then finally, sometimes maybe people you've worked for don't know what else to do, not sure how else to manage people. So they're managing the best way possible, and that is to almost be overly bearing and a micromanaging leader without even realizing that it happens. So the impact of micromanagement, and I'm going to ask you for your experiences, the impact of micromanagement, we see in the work that we do with clients, and if you look at the evidence on it, it increases stress in the workplace. It creates a greater sense of dependency on the leader. So once people have that, close management, they tend to then become dependent on it. And that can be difficult for you as a leader because they then come back to you time and time again where you want them to be more responsible. We can see a lower sense of morale. Morale decreases under closer scrutiny. Engagement reduces as well, so lower engagement for people who are micromanaged. Reduced performance, so we start to see performance erode. And of course, less ideas and innovation coming out from your teams to you as a leader. And there's a greater risk of burnout, not just for your teams, but also for leaders who are doing it, because you'll find that your workload increases if you're having to be involved in everybody that's working for you and their expectations. And of course, higher team turnover. And this is a huge challenge in a lot of businesses at the moment with recruitment. And one of the ways to improve that situation is to have a better retention policy. And a big part of leadership is how we retain and inspire our employees and teams. And earlier this week, I ran this LinkedIn poll, and it was just to ask for people's response to the question about, have you ever worked for a micromanager? I was quite interested. So these are the results. The poll was, 83% said yes, it was painful. Interestingly, 3% said yes, I quite enjoyed it, which was fascinating. And I think that's dependent on where you are in the life cycle of your role. If you're early in, it's probably good to have a manager that's quite close to your expectations and gives you that support. No, 10% and no have been lucky, and 3% said some other comments which were in there. But lots of interesting comments. Gave up very quickly because why do I need to bother making much effort or using my brain and initiative? I hated every minute and didn't stay there long as a result. Many years ago, and absolutely hated it. In fact, all our team was, and it was non-productive. I have been micromanaged, but I blame the company for providing no formal management or leadership training. Not only was it micromanagement, it was chaotic micromanagement. And final comment, I hated being micromanaged. What's the point of hiring someone to do a job and then sit on their shoulder all day? Very much like our Steve Jobs quote, right? So I'd be interested to hear from you, and then we'll start to look at, how do we start to fix this? What about you? What's your experience of it? What do you think people are micromanaging? And if you found yourself doing it, What do you think's going on? Love to hear your comments. Simon, thank you in the chat. Simon, customer and stakeholder optics can also drive micromanagement. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, Simon. Is that around trying to be seen to be doing the right thing? Is that what you mean by that? The customer stakeholder optics, so what people see can drive micromanagement. I totally agree. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, Simon. But your experiences of it. Yes, it is. Yeah. So trying to demonstrate that you're doing the right thing. Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But it doesn't actually do anybody any good, does it? It's something that can be, as you say, might be trying to present the right kind of image, but actually doesn't actually give anybody any freedom or accountability. Laura, thank you. Laura, so I'm going to read it as if I'm reading it. Fear is the main reason. People, in your honest opinion, people micromanagement coupled with time, or micromanage coupled with time. So fear. So you think fear on the side of the manager that the work won't be done, right? Fear that it won't be done properly, coupled with time. I think it's quicker to get people to just tell people what to do. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, agreed. And Laura's been both sides. So you've been on the receiving end, and you might have dabbled yourself as well, Laura. Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I have to say, I'd love to have said I never did it, but I have to say I have dabbled on both sides as well. Liz, thank you. Having to prove themselves and gaining trust and control. So trust that they know it'll be done if they tell someone really explicitly, and a sense of control. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Liz, thank you. Laura, yeah, trust and control comes from a position of fear because they have a job done. Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Okay, good. So you've all had some experience of this, right? And why people do it. Okay, good. So I just want to share something with you that I find quite interesting, and that's the performance curve. So you may have seen similar charts to this, but basically what the performance curve shows is that when you start to build up pressure in teams, you can find yourself, or you can find your teams are in one of three places, right? So the first place is without any pressure, without any targets, or without coaching, or without clarity, you find that team members can be bored, right? And the performance level is really low when people are bored and they're not put under enough kind of challenge. And then what happens is, as you increase the pressure, or you increase the challenge on people, they get to a position that we call eustress. And eustress is like positive stress, right? So it's when you've got performance deadlines, you know what you're doing, you've got clarity over it, you've got some support and some challenge, and you hit this zone of optimal performance. And all of a sudden, people's performance improves and increases, and so does yours as a leader. What then also can happen is, if you continue to press the gas pedal and you keep pushing and pushing people, you tip them past eustress into what they call distress. And what happens when people hit distress is that the brain and the mind actually start to reduce in function. So people's ability and capability starts to reduce. And then what happens is people tend to put on more pressure and get closer and start to micromanage. And so what we find is that if you look at the kind of performance curve, you've got people at one end where they perhaps haven't got the level of consistency from management. So they might have absentee management, and people don't perform under that level. Then you've got at the far end, you've got micromanagement and too much pressure, where you push people into either distress or anxiety, and performance reduces. And actually what we need to do is really try to hone in on this sweet spot, which is coaching, challenging, giving people sufficient direction, and then allowing them to hit the highest levels of performance, hit this optimal performance zone. And actually seeing it in a chart probably makes sense consciously and intellectually, but actually we need to start to think about, how do we develop this for our teams? How do we start to recognize where people are in this kind of performance curve, and do we need to get closer to people and offer more challenge and coach, or do we need to actually start to give them clearer expectations and then step away and let them deliver and start to move responsibility and ownership to the individual? So as you start to think, I plant this as a seed with you, as you start to think about your teams, the approach you're taking, how and where you might need to adjust your approach so that you help people to get to this point of eustress and higher levels of performance. Okay, and I want to share I'll share some principles around coaching, because I hope this will be useful for you as well. But there's this model that you may have seen us use, and it's in the book Coaching Leaders. And the whole idea of this model is that it's a kind of 7-step model that really helps you to start to lay out your leadership approach. And it starts with having a plan around the business or the function that you're operating in. Then it works on the trust and the relationships that you form with your teams, and making sure that there is a positive and kind of constructive relationship with your team, so that you've earned the right to challenge them, coach them, and be someone who can lead that organization and that team. Because without trust, even if you apply some of the coaching skills, you can find that people won't completely open up and lean into performance. So we have to build that trust. Then we talk about this first step of contracting, and we've run this in previous sessions. If you'd like information on it, just feel free to contact me. And then it's about clarity of objectives and goals, making sure that you and your team are clear on what is high performance, and have you captured that, documented it? Are you reviewing and working on that together? That's really important, because if you don't know and they don't know, it's really difficult for them to deliver it. Then it's about creating time for your team members to do the work and you to observe them, because from that place of observation, you'll see things that they can't see for themselves. And that's really useful. That's a big part of leadership responsibility, helping your teams to see things they can't see for themselves. And from there, of course, it gives you the option to coach for change. So that's the whole principle of being able to coach people. But without these, former steps, you can find yourself having individual conversations that just don't quite get you the result or the change or the stickiness that you're looking for in terms of behavior change. And then we won't talk about it. We'll talk about coaching for change today. Then the final part of the model is this heroes in the making, and that's about improving development effectiveness, helping people to understand, what are the key areas they should be focusing on and working on to develop themselves, and supporting them to do that through a series of conversations that are, well structured and give you and your team the confidence that you're going to be able to deliver a change in the future. So let's talk about some coaching principles. Then I'll kind of ask you to think about this for yourselves. But you can only sorry, I'm just going to mute something in the background. That's it. Sorry. You can only coach people by questioning, listening, and creating some space for the conversation. And that sounds, again, it's an obvious fundamental, but what I've noticed is we tend to, we talked about time. Laura talked about time. One of the reasons we want to micromanage is because it's quicker and easier in the short term. And actually, we really want to create a bit of space for a higher quality conversation with people when we're coaching, and slow things down a little. And so this coaching stage, his ability to have these coaching conversations, can be really transformational for you and your teams, but it does take some time, because we want your team member to open up. We have to be in a position where we're seeking to understand what's going on for them, and recognizing that everything that you need or I need to know about your team to get the best level of performance from them, it is already in their mind. They already understand what it takes to tap into higher levels of performance and commitment. But the best way, the only way for us to get that from them, is to have a coaching conversation. It's through asking good questions and listening. So one of the challenges then is how do we start to adjust our approach to becoming more of a coaching approach rather than a directive approach? And the answer is kind of understanding what coaching is. So coaching for teams is about building confidence. And I've talked about trust already. If we have confidence and trust, then we can start to coach people more effectively. But coaching really is about providing two things to people. It's about providing a challenge to them, and it's about providing support, so that when you've got this combination of challenge and support, all of a sudden people will find performance moves, so that their commitment moves, their performance moves. And it really is about questioning and listening, and asking good questions of people, listening carefully to them. And we've covered questioning and listening in previous sessions. Again, if you want to catch up on that, I'll happily share a recording of those sessions with you. But then also it's about helping people, because very often our teams, and maybe even you'll find yourself being problem focused. And it really is coaching an opportunity to move people to solutions and outcome focused. We do that through the questions that we ask and the approach that we take specifically to coaching your teams. And I like the principle of pulling from people, not pushing. So you're pulling commitment, pulling ideas, getting them to come up with answers and solutions rather than pushing ideas onto them. And by pulling from people, and then every now and then you might find that people don't always have exactly the right answers, then what we do is signpost. So we might start to give them some direction or maybe share some ideas, but that's about giving them something that they can then pick up and take for themselves, rather than telling them specifically what to do. And we really do want to give people the opportunity to reflect and shift their perspective towards better ways of doing things, or improving the way that they're doing things today. And it really should start to energize people. It should build their self-belief, bringing us right back to this, psychology layer around confidence, and help them to create focus, a clarity, and priorities. So they stop seeing everything and start seeing the one thing or the couple of things that are the priority for them to focus in on. But it comes from them. They're the ones that start to see that opportunity to prioritize their workload and prioritize the impact that they're going to make. And ultimately, what we're really trying to help them to get to is this sense of self-responsibility and accountability, so that as leaders, it doesn't feel like it's your responsibility for your team to perform and deliver. It starts to feel like it's theirs. We want to pass the baton to our team member so that responsibility becomes theirs, not ours. And then finally, of course, it's about commitment. So commitment to change, and a commitment for them to act in accordance with the change that they want to make. So it's all about that transition of responsibility from us to them. And recognizing, and I'm sure you recognize this in your own businesses, it's about an ongoing and continuous series of conversations that help you to continue that accountability with your team, so they start to make those improvements in performance and responsibility. And so coaching for change, how do we do it? There's a number of principles that are useful. So the first thing is that we park ourselves, and we try and park any input that we give. So this really is about pulling from people rather than sharing ideas. So we park ourselves and we park our input. And then we have to focus on the other person. And again, all these things sound really easy, but it's not always straightforward. And I've experienced this myself, and I've worked with clients where it is so tempting, especially when you're a high performer, when you know what needs to be done. It's so easy to just jump in and tell people. But actually, if you focus on what that person in front of you either doesn't know or needs to know, then it really switches your perspective, because they've got to come to the conclusion themselves. And having rapport, having a relationship, being trusted is really important, because without that, people struggle to open up. They struggle to actually lean into the conversation around coaching. And so sometimes we'll have to slow down, create some space for a more informed conversation that's about the person in front of us, not about us, and ask questions and think about listening and challenging that person. How do we start to challenge their assumptions, challenge their perceptions, and help them to do that for themselves through the questions that we ask? And that could be really useful. So how do we help them challenge their own perceptions, and of course encourage them to be responsible to start to take action and change, make those changes for themselves, rather than have those changes kind of directed to them from us. And then finally, as you're having these conversations, you're in a leadership position, you've been a high performers before, then actually trusting your own intuition and experience to work out, right, where do I need to go with this? How do I help this person to lean into this, pick up responsibility, and start to make a shift in their performance? And it won't be, no two conversations are exactly the same. That's why your intuition and experience is so important. And actually having that awareness that it's almost like walking down a path as you're having these coaching conversations. You have to adapt and adjust accordingly, depending on where that conversation takes you. And you'll find that the more you do it, the easier it gets. But it's that first initial early kind of coaching conversation that really does set you off on the right path. And it's a bit like anything, once you recognize the value it creates and that it works, then you're more likely and encouraged to do more. But if you have those early conversations and don't find that you get the results, or you're not able to hold the space to have that coaching conversation, then you never kind of make that shift yourself. So often it's about how we change as leaders in our approach to coaching our teams. So then we think about, I talk about silence, because this is as you start to have these coaching conversations, what you'll notice is what I noticed when I first started doing this, that if you're used to kind of giving a lot of direction and then you start to coach, you'll find that there's some periods of silence, maybe uncomfortable silence. And the thing to remember is that actually sometimes we have to manage ourselves through that silence, right? Through those uncomfortable moments. And it's something that even to this day, it's something I work on regularly, because I do a lot of coaching with teams and with clients. And sometimes there are extended periods of silence when people are thinking, or they're writing, or they're reflecting. And very often, because we're in busy roles, busy positions, busy businesses, we don't have a lot of space. So when it happens, it can feel really uncomfortable. So just as a kind of series of perspective shifts around what is discomfort and silence, sometimes we have to change our relationship with what we think silence is, or what we think discomfort in a silent moment is, and think, well, what is it really? And actually all it is a feeling. So we create this feeling of discomfort. What we can do practically in those moments is breathe. So take a deep breath, relax, think about, calming the way that we are calming ourselves, calming the way that we think about the situation, and get curious about the other person. And very often I think just recognizing that if somebody's thinking and there's some silence, actually that's a good thing. So try and allow that silence and that space to expand, so that it gives people that thinking space. And one of the things that is really useful as well is, if you know you're going to have some of those conversations where there is a bit more silence, actually prepare yourself for it in advance. Just rehearse, think about, okay, in that moment, I'm going to just create some silence and space. I'm going to be comfortable with it. I'm going to practice some silences, perhaps with your partner, with your friends, with your family. Just start to practice creating some silence so that you get used to doing it. Because if you aren't used to doing it, what happens is we jump in and fill the space, and before we know it, we're micromanaging without realizing it, because we're filling all that space that is thinking space for people when we're asking them great questions. And I've seen it in lots of different situations. I've experienced it, done it myself, where you ask a question, you think that's a good question, and then because you don't wait for the answer, you fill the space, and then all of a sudden the question is no longer a good question, because you haven't allowed the other person the thinking space and the processing space to really answer it. Okay, so we've talked about kind of coaching principles. We've talked about some of the approach that you can take to coaching, and then we've talked about silence. I'd love to hear from you, based on what we've covered so far, what's one thing you need to work on or change? You can either drop it in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and share it, I'd love for you to do that. I'm very happy either way. This is one of those moments where I am cultivating some silence, so it is intentional. I'll let you all can see you tapping away. One thing you need to work on. Thank you, Liz. Probably park myself and allow the comfortable or uncomfortable silence a little more. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Nigel Gardner, thank you, Nigel. Same, making some space for people to have those conversations. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Good, thank you. Keep them coming in the chat, or if you'd like to discuss. Nigel, Laura, anything from you? No? Not in this? No? Okay, that's all right. Okay, couple of other things, and then I'll open up for questions. So when we think about leadership, I really like this analogy, right? That if you think about leadership styles, we think about whether it's micromanagement or it's directive management. When people only know how to work in one way, if all you have is a hammer, right, everything looks like a nail, right? So if the way that you approach leadership is that you direct and you're telling people, and actually there are situations that don't call for that, or if there are situations where you haven't got the answer, then all of a sudden you come unstuck, right? And you start to use what you think has always worked, and it just doesn't. And I think back to my corporate world, my corporate journey, and the last couple of positions I had, I worked for a manager, and his only style was really aggressive, really bullish. He did it with everybody. Did it with customers. It was quite embarrassing. Did it with his team. I was a member of his team. He did it with his peers. He even did it with his own boss. It was really strange to see. Just one of those, really aggressive, and he could not change. And he was like, and it's really interesting. The reason this quote reminds me is because one of my colleagues used to call him the hammer, because he used to literally go around hammering everybody. And so this quote really does resonate, because if you've had experiences of working with leaders who have one style and they just deploy it everywhere, it can actually become it can become quite just demotivating, and it can start to erode morale. And if you've got a style that you might find is predominant and it needs to shift, then recognizing actually sometimes we need to change our approach. And a lot of organizations, I talked about it earlier, a lot of organizations are meeting this kind of recruitment and retention challenge at the moment. And so I like to share, as leaders, sometimes there are things that we kind of think, okay, how do I change that? And I love this chart because it just shows that, it's sometimes if we're in leadership roles, we can't control what we pay our teams because there are finite budgets. We can't create opportunities for promotion for people because it's a set structure. So those two things aside, actually thinking about what else can we do to engage our teams and start to make them feel more motivated at work and improve retention and their commitment to the organization. And if you look at these 10 areas, apart from those two that we already mentioned, employees like to be in an organization where they're mentored and developed. So it's a really important part of what gains commitment from people. So mentoring and developing, we can do that as leaders. People actually like to stay in organizations where they feel positively challenged. I'll take you back to that performance curve. Okay, so challenged in an area where they hit stress, positive stress. I'm given timelines that are ambitious, but I also have the right capability. I'm given clear direction, and my performance can lift as a result of that challenge at the right moment. They like to be involved. And more, with remote working teams and perhaps sometimes it can feel a little bit disparate in an organization. Getting people involved, having that regular communication as a team is really useful for keeping people's commitment and engagement high. People like to feel appreciated. And I know that, again, obvious things, right? But actually spending some time figuring out for each member of your team, what are they doing that I can show some genuine appreciation for, is really useful. I really like the way you did that. Think about praise and giving some positive feedback. People like to feel valued. So recognizing when they do something that creates value within the organization and makes them feel valued for doing it. People like to feel as if they're working on something bigger. So rather than just thinking about what they do in their role, think about how does that contribute to the organization? How's the organization contributing to our market? How's the market contributing towards the wider community that we operate within? So that kind of mission-centric idea is really useful if you can start to talk to your teams about that. And then, of course, empowered. And coaching is all about empowering people. So the approach we take to leadership can empower people. And then finally, trusting them. And trusting, when we're not micromanaging and we are coaching, it demonstrates trust. Rather than telling people we trust them, we demonstrate that we trust them through that coaching approach. So I wanted to share this because that's really useful in terms of your influence as a leader and what you can do. Got a few more comments in the box, so thank you everybody for that. Laura says, silence is always hard. We have to get comfortable with the discomfort, and that's can be the challenge. I agree. When we realize it is about us, not the silence itself, that's been the difference for me. Yeah, I like that. When we realize it's about us, so we're the discomfort. We're not uncomfortable about the silence. We're uncomfortable about ourselves. Yeah, nice. Liz, thanks. I like silence. It does work. Yes, very powerful. Laura, if we hold the space when someone is overwhelmed and so in it, they will need the space to be able to think through the thoughts. They don't want someone to fill it. So silence is crucial. So you can sit with it, they can process and come up with their own ideas. Yeah, agreed. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So I'd love to hear your final kind of thoughts, final action, and then I'll take Q&A as well. If you've got questions, I'd love to hear your questions and experiences from today's session. Hope you've found it useful so far. Who's got a question that might be on their mind in terms of today's session? This kind of pivot from micromanaging to coaching. Or not micromanaging, maybe. You are all on mute, by the way, just in case you didn't realise.
Do you want us to type or to talk? That's all.
Oh, well done, Liz.
What would you rather?
Yeah, no, talk. It'd be easier if you don't mind. Okay. Yeah, talk.
I suppose for me, I just have to remember not to slip into that whole kind of like, to always remember to coach, because it's quite easy in a hectic period of time, be it product launches or whatever it might be, just to slip into sort of not old habits, but just not to remember those coaching skills, I suppose. And also for me, it's like taking the team on the journey with me, because I work at 1,000 miles an hour, which my brain always seems to do. So it is. And like you, Justin, I suppose over the years I've had to just say, slow down, like get people on it with me, rather than going at 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. So actually recognizing that different people have a different pace of working.
Different way. Yeah.
And making sure that you're able to accommodate their pace so they keep up with you, or keep up with the journey that you're on. Yeah,
and not getting frustrated with them, because I suppose if I feel like, oh, for God's sake, look,
yeah,
that's the other piece, isn't it? But it comes with just experience, and because we've all done it, I'm sure.
yeah, we have. Yeah, I might have told this last week, but early last week I was in a hotel with a client, and the client went to take a call. And while I was sitting there, there was a guy and a guy who was clearly the manager and his direct report, and they were having this review. and I think it must have been a salesperson, because he was talking through his territory and what was going on. And as he was talking, the manager was literally sitting on his hands and his feet were jumping around, and you could see he was literally, even though he was listening, his body language was literally screaming, "Oh, I just want to jump in. I want to say something." And then he was tapping and clicking his pen, and it was quite interesting to watch, because even if we get some of these skills down, our body language can sometimes betray us. It just leaks out of us. We also have to remember to calm ourselves and calm almost your emotional reactions to things as well, because your team feel it, right? They sense it.
Yeah. And my face tells 1,000 pictures. That's like, I've just got to be like, really.
Yeah, poker face. Yeah. It's easy to let it
Botox, I think, Justin, Botox. Anyway.
Hey, that's a nice idea.
Yeah.
That's a nice idea. Yeah. If you've got any tips on that, Liz, let us know. But no, good. Yeah, thanks, Liz. So yours is about that kind of making sure that your team keep up, that you manage yourself so that you're not almost racing away and leaving people behind. Yeah, it's good. Thank you. Any other kind of insights from today? Anything else that you want to just share that's your final action for today's session?
I think I've got two things really.
Thanks, Simon.
Sorry, you can see me now.
I can, thank you.
I find, I think I'm in the past have been accused of being, accused is maybe not the right word, but been accused of being a micromanager, but also the opposite. And I find that in certain situations that adopting a micromanagement or detailed management approach is part of a toolkit that's useful. I think what is challenging sometimes is to know when to stop it. And to say, okay, that's worked. We can now revert back to, a more distance-based approach, a more empowered approach and less detailed approach, and understanding the point at which, a tactic of micromanagement becomes the norm. And when it becomes the norm, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think at times, we all kind of tend to throw our hands up in horror about the thought of micromanagement, but I think at certain times it can be a useful tactic, but it can't be the way you work. But I think my real takeaway for me is something you said probably right at the start, which is clarifying and setting out what equates to high performance. And I think that's not something I've probably done sufficiently in the past. So, I'm sure, we kind of talk about objectives and standards of performance and that kind of thing. But really, in a coaching mode, setting out what high performance looks like, I think is something I would certainly need to do more often.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Simon. That's really good insight. So actually getting that clarity between, well, I say clarity, the understanding between you and your team over what is high performance. What does high performance look like?
Yeah, so not just in terms of a metric.
Yeah. No, but in terms of the actual actions and behaviors.
Actions and behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Simon. Very good. Yeah, very good. And I've you saw the coach model that we talked about in the objectives and goals.
Yes, I've got a problem with that.
Okay, so we have there's a previous session I ran on how do we create clarity around objectives, goals, and kind of performance expectations, and that's a really important step because that bit gives you and the other person confidence. This is what high performance looks like, and then that kind of document and that series of performance behaviors then belongs to the person.
Yes.
And it's their responsibility to review it with you rather than the other way around.
Yes.
So that's really important.
Oh, maybe I could grab that from you at some point.
Yeah.
The problem I have with it is the last bit, the H, the heroes, is one of my mantras in organisations that I lead is I don't like heroes.
Okay.
Because I find that heroes normally are the ones that start the fires and then are heroic in putting them out. Like people who go along and deliver and are not waving a banner all the time. So
yeah. Well, hopefully it's just a term. It's not. It's more about helping people to see a bigger picture for themselves, a bigger contribution.
For sure.
But I get the. I've had that experience as well. I know what you mean. You've got to get the association right. Yeah. Thank you, Simon. That's really good. Okay, we are coming up to our last couple of minutes, so I'm going to kind of wrap up. I just want to share a couple of other things before we close, if I may. So, hopefully you can see my screen. Final thing, you've all got a kind of action or two from today's session. So I would say my advice is kind of get something in the diary, get it scheduled so that you follow through on it, whatever that looks like. It might be a half an hour session with yourself, it might be a session with your team, but put that window in so that you make that commitment to yourself, because after today's session, you know what life's like. It's going to throw loads of things at you, and you'll forget about today's conversation. I also wanted to share. So today's session was about specifically how do we make that transition? How do we stop micromanaging, get greater clarity for our teams, and then we can coach from there. So we back off and coach from there. If that's something that's specifically, a challenge for you right now, something you'd like to continue to discuss or work on, if you'd like a specific conversation with me about that for your team, if you'd like a kind of deeper conversation, then feel free to book a one-to-one session. It's like a no obligation strategy session. You get 45 minutes. It's free of charge. It's on me. Just gives you an opportunity. You want to go deeper into this topic and kind of talk specifically about what you're working on, then you've got a chance to do that. And we do kind of 3 things in that strategy session. Where are you now? What are the current challenges and priorities for your team? Part 2 is where would you like to be in 12 months? And then part 3 is what are the key changes and actions that you need to take? And it just that's what coaching is, right? Hopefully these are things you're doing for your teams. Just give you an opportunity to get that same level of clarity and coaching for you too. And Liz, we're meeting tomorrow morning, so we'll go through these 3 steps tomorrow morning ourselves. But if you'd like to book in, there's a link in the chat. I've just shared it with you. It's the 45-minute strategy link. And it gives you an opportunity if you wanted to have a conversation with me. We can talk about any of the different models, but specifically we can go deeper on this topic if you'd like. Okay, we're at 4 minutes to the hour. Thank you everyone for staying with me for the full session. I really appreciate it. I've got a couple of minutes. If anybody's got one last question or one last comment you'd like to ask, I'm very happy to take a comment or a question. Otherwise, we will wrap up and finish. Any more for any more? Thank you, Liz. No, all good. Thank you. Listen, thanks everybody. I really appreciate your engagement and questions and comments. It's really part of what makes these sessions valuable. Thanks so much, everyone. If you'd like to book in, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much. Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, Nigel and Simon and Sandeep. And I look forward to catching up with you all again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Justin.
See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, bye.